Imagine you are uh, staring at a standard mundane household ironing board cover, like the kind you can just pick up at any local department store.
Right.
Now imagine you are a brilliant aerospace scientist in, say, 1959. You're standing in a lab at Brooks Air Force Base, and you're tasked with a problem that has literally never existed in the history of human civilization.
Which is a pretty wild place to find yourself.
Exactly. You have to launch a living creature, specifically, a monkey, into the lethal freezing vacuum of space. And as you scramble to design a pressurized suit that, won't rupture or burn or freeze, you realize that the heat-resistant fabric of that random ironing board cover is the exact material you need to keep this pioneer alive.
It's, it is the absolute definition of MacGyvering on a cosmic scale.
It really is. Welcome to today's deep dive. We always try to find the unexpected angles here, and today we have a fascinating stack of material. We are unpacking the February 2025 Air Force Handbook 1.
Right, which is often referred to as just the Airman Manual.
Yeah, the Airman Manual, and we're looking at that alongside a very specific, highly structured matrix called the Airman Development and Testing Chart, or ADTC.
Which, honestly, to a civilian ear, sounds like the most bureaucratic, dry piece of administrative paperwork imaginable.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds terrible. But
Yeah.
what we are going to do today is take this doctrine and use it to decode the anatomy of high-stakes leadership. We're exploring how the United States Air Force literally engineers the minds of its mid-level managers.
Specifically, the technical sergeants.
Yes, the TSGT. We're going to focus on the relentless expectations placed on them by blending these uncompromising ethical standards with a staggering history of, well, innovation, spatial disorientation, and battlefield sacrifice. And to help us navigate this, I have the perfect guide here to synthesize all this dense military doctrine into something you can actually use.
Well, thank you. I am genuinely looking forward to this. Because, what this manual represents isn't just a list of rules. It's an organization trying to map the unmappable, really.
Meaning human character.
Exactly. Human character under extreme duress.
So imagine you were handed this ADTC chart on your first day as a mid-level manager. You'd probably expect to be tested entirely on your technical skills, right? Like, can you fix the engine? Can you do the math?
Yeah, that's the standard corporate assumption.
But instead, the military is grading your cognitive processing. Let's break down this matrix. It literally grades leadership comprehension on a scale from A to D.
It does. It's a framework that dictates exactly what level of mental engagement is required for different ranks across this massive spectrum of knowledge.
Yeah.
Let's look at the baseline.
Okay.
So level A is remembering. That's your basic recall. Definitions, lists, rote memorization. Can you remember the date a certain event happened?
Right, it's basically trivia night knowledge.
Exactly. Then we move up to level B, which is understanding. This is where you can actually interpret the information, summarize it, explain it to someone else, your own word.
I always think of it as the difference between knowing the capital of France and being able to explain the geopolitical significance of Paris.
That's a great way to put it. Then we hit level C, which is applying, and this is execution.
Rubber meeting the road.
Yeah. You're carrying out a procedure.
Mm.
You are taking learned material and using it successfully in a chaotic real-world situation. And finally, the top tier is level D, analyzing, where you're breaking complex concepts down to see how the interlocking gears serve the overall structure. Usually you do that to diagnose a systemic failure or build a new strategy.
And as we look at this chart specifically for a technical sergeant, the TSGT, the expectations are incredibly revealing.
Oh, this is where the true priorities of the institution become completely visible. A technical sergeant is a crucial operational linchpin. They are the bridge between the strategic officers and the tactical junior enlisted.
Right.
So when you look at the ADTC for this section covering early aviation history, the requirement for a technical sergeant is merely level A, remembering.
So they don't need to write like a master's thesis on the aerodynamic theories of the Wright brothers. They just need to remember the basic timeline.
Precisely. But when you move over to the sections on Air Force core values and ethical standards,
Oh, this is the crazy part.
the requirement violently jumps to level C, applying.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
It tells you everything about what they value.
Right.
The military demands ethical execution over rote historical memorization. You have to be able to apply ethics.
Yeah.
You are expected to execute morality with the same flawless precision that you would use to execute a pre-flight mechanical checklist.
You know what that reminds me of? It's like learning a martial art.
Oh, how so?
Well, level A is like knowing the Japanese name of a specific punch, right? And level B is understanding the biomechanics, knowing that the power comes from rotating the hip, not just the shoulder.
Right, the theory behind it.
Yeah. But level C is successfully throwing that punch in a high-stress, full-contact sparring match when your heart rate is at 180, you are exhausted, and the other person is actively swinging back at your head.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
And in the military, the text makes it clear that the stakes of that sparring match are literally life and death. Which brings us to a foundational concept in the manual, which is the profession of arms.
Yeah, this is not treated as a corporate gig.
Not at all. General Ronald Fogelman, who was a former Air Force Chief of Staff, is quoted saying, "Practitioners of this profession are entrusted with the security of the nation itself."
The text draws a very stark line in the sand. It says this profession is distinguished by the expertise in the justified application of lethal military force and the willingness of those who pay the ultimate sacrifice. I mean, let's just pause on that for a second. That is a heavy, heavy sentence.
It's immense.
No other profession explicitly expects its members to lay down their lives for their coworkers or their country's ideals as a baseline job requirement.
Right, because when you hand a human being the legal authority to apply justified lethal force,
Yeah.
you cannot do that without an ironclad, internalized ethical foundation. That is why the Level C application of those core values is totally non-negotiable.
The machine needs a moral compass.
Exactly. The technical skill of flying a multi-million-dollar jet or calibrating a radar array is entirely secondary to the character of the person operating it.
Let's dig into the mechanics of that character framework then. The Air Force operates on 3 core values: integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. The manual actually breaks these down into specific operational virtues, starting with integrity first.
Right.
The virtues listed are honesty, courage, and accountability. Now, in a civilian corporate office, if you lack honesty, you might fudge a quarterly report and, eventually get fired. But what does the manual say happens when you lack honesty in this environment?
Well, honesty is described as the absolute hallmark of integrity. It requires individuals to accurately report their findings regardless of the consequences. Think about a flight line mechanic.
Okay.
If they lie about checking a hydraulic valve because they're tired and just want to go home, an aircraft falls out of the sky. The physical reality of aviation doesn't care about your excuses.
Wow.
But the second virtue, courage, is where the psychology gets really interesting.
Because it's not just about charging into gunfire.
Right, exactly. The text explicitly states that courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing the right thing despite the presence of fear. It categorizes courage into personal, physical, and moral.
Moral courage being the big one here.
Yes, moral courage is specifically highlighted as the ability to stand by those core values, even when it risks your reputation, your rank, or your entire career.
And then accountability. Maintaining total transparency and taking ownership of the outcomes, whether you're explaining it to the American people, your immediate supervisor, or just staring at yourself in the mirror.
Exactly.
From there, we move to the second core value, which is service before self. The virtues are duty, loyalty, and respect.
Duty is framed fascinatingly here. The manual notes that while your formal responsibilities are determined by laws, regulations, and directives,
The paper?
right, the paperwork, but the sense of duty is deeply personal. It's bound by the individual oath an airman takes. It requires a mindset that completely embraces expectations that are not levied on the general public.
And loyalty. The text defines loyalty as an internal commitment to something bigger than the individual, but it gives a very specific hierarchy, which I thought was super interesting. Nation first, Air Force values second, and the men and women you serve with third.
That ordering is vital. It completely prevents tribalism.
Right. Because you can't just protect your buddies.
Exactly. You cannot be so loyal to your immediate squad mates that you cover up a crime, because that violates loyalty to the Air Force values and the nation. The manual also crucially points out that loyalty to leadership means faithfully executing decisions even when you personally disagree with them.
While using the proper chain of command to offer alternative solutions, of course. Finally, we have excellence in all we do. The virtues here are mission, discipline, and teamwork. The text is careful to note this isn't about demanding flawless perfection right out of the gate, but rather a sustained passion for continuous improvement.
But holding these values in a perfectly air-conditioned classroom is easy. The real crucible is when those values collide with reality.
Right, the messy real world.
Exactly. The manual spends significant time on how to navigate ethical dilemmas.
Yes, and this is where it gets incredibly pragmatic. It identifies three sources of ethical dilemmas: uncertainty, competing values, and potential harm.
Let's break those down.
So uncertainty is just the fog of war. You have to make a call without having all the facts. Competing values is when your personal moral compass clashes with the institution's demands, or when two good things are in opposition. So how does a technical surgeon actually navigate that?
The text offers three specific tests formulated by Dr. Robert M. Hicks to check the morality of an action. The first is the network test.
Okay, what's that?
You ask yourself, how would this decision look if it was broadcast on the evening news or went viral on social media? Would it bring credit to the organization, or would it bring profound discredit?
It's the modern upgrade to the old front page of the newspaper test. Highly practical.
Very. Then there's the United States of America test. You ask, is this decision good for the U.S.? Is it good for the Air Force? Is it good for my unit? And finally, is it good for me?
Checking to make sure your priorities are stacked in the exact right order.
Yeah. And then we reach the third metric, the divine test.
Okay, wait, let's pause on this for a second because I have to push back here.
Okay, go for it.
The text says, the divine test asks, would I feel good about the decision when I give account for my life? Would you feel guilt or loss of trust from this action? For a military structure that is so rigid, so intensely based on lawful orders and regulations, doesn't this feel a bit dangerous?
Dangerous in what way?
Well, a military runs on obedience to lawful orders.
Hmm.
If you have a technical sergeant who evaluates a mission and says, you know what, my personal conscience, my interpretation of the divine says no, doesn't the entire chain of command just fracture? Who is defining the divine here? It feels incredibly subjective for a life and death organization.
It's a very valid concern, but I would argue that it's actually the most rigorous and necessary test of the three, specifically because of the history of military power.
How so?
Think about the alternative. If you only rely on the USA test or the network test, you're relying entirely on external validation, what society thinks or what the hierarchy dictates. But history is full of perfectly legal, organizationally sanctioned orders that were morally abhorrent.
I was just following orders defense.
Exactly, the Nuremberg defense. The divine test is not necessarily about a specific theology. It is the ultimate mandate of individual moral agency. It strips away your uniform, your rank, the media optics, and the approval of your commanding officer.
It's just you.
It forces the leader to stand naked before their own conscience. When all the noise is gone, at the end of your life, could you live with what you did? The military wants operators who possess that internal circuit breaker because they are entrusted with lethal force.
The ultimate internalized standard. I see it now.
Right.
It prevents the machine from running blind. For you listening right now, try applying this to your own life. Think about a difficult decision you had to make recently at work, or maybe a conflict in your family.
Run it through the network test.
Yeah. Or adapt the USA test. Ask yourself, is this good for my industry, my company, my immediate team, and then lastly, me? It completely shifts the variables.
It forces absolute alignment between what you claim your values are and what your actions actually produce in the real world.
But if you claim integrity and excellence are your baselines, how do you actually enforce that when the machinery itself is untried, chaotic, and actively trying to kill you?
That's the real test.
To answer that, we have to look at the grease-stained origins of this force. We are moving from the pristine theory of ethics to August 1907, the establishment of the Aeronautical Division, Signal Corps.
The origins are remarkably, almost comically humble. You have to remember, the military didn't know what airpower was yet.
They had no clue.
No, it was primarily viewed as a tool for observation, getting high up to see over the enemy's hills.
And the detail in the manual is fantastic. The Army realized they still had some old deteriorating balloons sitting around from the disbanded balloon corps of the Civil War and Spanish-American War eras, and they needed someone to figure out how to actually use them.
Right.
So they sent two enlisted men, Corporal Eddie Ward and Private Joseph Barrett, to the Leo Stevens Balloon Factory in New York.
Their job was to learn fabric handling, the intricate folding of massive canvases, stitching, and the highly volatile manufacturing of buoyant gases.
Highly volatile being the key phrase.
Oh yeah. How do you actually generate the gas to lift a platform without blowing yourself up in 1907?
Right. Excellence in all we do back then wasn't some corporate poster. It meant figuring out how to stitch a giant piece of fabric together so you didn't plummet 1,000 feet to the earth.
And analytically, this early moment establishes the total force concept that the manual emphasizes today.
Break that down for us.
The total force leverages officers, enlisted members, and civilians working in concert. From the very first days of American military aviation, it wasn't just dashing officers wearing silk scarves in cockpits. It absolutely required the enlisted mechanics, the tradesmen, and the craftsmen to get the entire concept off the ground.
Right.
Ward and Barrett represent the foundational truth of air power. Without the enlisted technician, the aircraft is just a very expensive museum piece.
And speaking of those enlisted pioneers, the text introduces us to an incredible figure, William C. Ocker. He entered the Army in 1898, served in the cavalry and artillery, and eventually became the third enlisted pilot in 1914. But his real legacy, the reason he is in the manual, is his title as the father of blind flight.
This is a textbook example of Level C applying manifesting as technological innovation. During World War I, Ocker recognized a lethal, terrifying problem. Pilots flying into clouds or heavy fog were becoming spatially disoriented and crashing.
Let's actually explain the mechanics of that, because spatial disorientation is terrifying. When you are flying in a cloud, you have no visual horizon.
Not at all.
And your inner ear, the vestibular system, which has fluid in these little semicircular canals, is easily tricked. If you enter a slow, banking turn, the fluid eventually stabilizes. Your brain suddenly thinks you are flying straight and level even though you're angled toward the ground.
Exactly. And when you drop out of the cloud and suddenly see the ground rushing up at an angle, your instinct is to pull back on the stick.
Which makes sense logically if you're falling.
Right, but because you are already banking, pulling back just tightens the turn and accelerates your descent. It's called a graveyard spiral. The pilot's own physiology is feeding them fatal lies.
Ocker didn't just accept this as an unavoidable occupational hazard. He developed a flight integrator.
He realized pilots needed a tool that they could trust more than their own bodies. The text describes the integrator as an electrically driven gyroscope. It featured a moving background scroll that depicted a sky with clouds and a miniature airplane silhouette that stayed correctly oriented to the artificial horizon.
It essentially forced the pilot's brain to override its faulty inner ear signals by giving it a reliable visual anchor. He proved it by flying 900 miles in 1930 in a completely enclosed cockpit using this device.
Which was completely unheard of at the time.
Yeah, and because of this, in 1955, he was posthumously awarded the Legion of Merit, because his training devices saved countless lives during the massive air campaigns of World War II.
He applied his technical understanding to solve a physiological trap that was killing his peers. That is the virtue of service before self, resulting in life-saving engineering.
And then we have a figure whose innovation wasn't mechanical, but purely strategic and political. Billy Mitchell, widely considered the father of the USAF.
Mitchell was a visionary. He earned his private pilot's license, joined the aviation section, and observed the air war in Europe. He became absolutely convinced that air power wasn't just an auxiliary tool for the Army or Navy. It was the future of national defense.
And he advocated relentlessly for an independent Air Force.
Relentlessly.
And the establishment hated him for it. To prove his point, in June 1921, he led the 1st Provisional Air Brigade in a series of bombing trials. His target was a 27,000-ton former German battleship, the Ostfriesland. The Navy thought it was a joke.
Of course they did.
How could a canvas and wood biplane sink a heavily armored steel Leviathan?
But Mitchell understood the mechanics of concussive force. He instructed his pilots not just to aim for direct hits on the armored deck, but to drop heavy bombs in the water right alongside the hull.
The water acts as an incompressible medium. The shock wave of the underwater explosions acts like a massive hammer, cracking the hull plates below the waterline where there is no armor.
Precisely. They sank the undisputed king of the sea. But Mitchell's true brilliance was his strategic foresight. He was looking at the geopolitical map through an entirely new lens.
This blew my mind. The manual notes that in 1924, Mitchell developed a 324-page report predicting a future war with Japan. He systematically calculated the logistics of island hopping and specifically predicted a surprise attack on the Hawaiian Islands conducted by land-based aircraft or aircraft operating from carriers.
Wait, 1924.
Yeah, 1924. He published this in a book called Wing Defense in 1925.
He predicted Pearl Harbor almost exactly as it happened, 16 years before the attack occurred. He looked at the vastness of the Pacific, the speed of emerging aircraft, and the strategic vulnerability of naval bases, and just did the math.
And it cost him everything. He was court-martialed for his insubordination and outspoken criticism of military leadership's failure to invest in air power.
Which brings us right back to the core values. Mitchell embodied moral courage. He risked and ultimately sacrificed his entire career to advocate for what he objectively believed was necessary for the nation's survival. He saw a truth the establishment refused to see.
But the establishment was forced to catch up eventually. As aviation technology exploded, the scale of human conflict grew with it. World War I was a staggering leap in industrial slaughter. The manual notes the explosive expansion of the aviation section, billions of dollars spent, and a war that claimed over 70 million lives globally.
Air power evolved from observation balloons to specialized fighter aircraft engaging in dogfights. The geometry of war became three-dimensional.
Out of that crucible emerged figures like Edward Rickenbacker, the ace of aces. Fast Eddie had 26 confirmed aerial victories, held the American record for victories until World War II, and earned the Medal of Honor. But as we transition from the First World War to the Second, the narrative in the manual shifts.
How so?
It's no longer just about mastering the technology. It's about the military being forced to confront its own internal systemic barriers.
Ah, yes. This is a critical evolution in the profession of arms. We see the institutional struggle with racial discrimination. The military, mirroring the society it served, was deeply segregated. But the sheer logistical demands of World War II began to crack those walls.
Because they just needed everyone they could get.
Exactly. In 1941, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, prohibiting racial discrimination in vocational and training programs.
It was a step, but it didn't end segregation. Black airmen, like the legendary Tuskegee Airmen, were still restricted to all black units. It wasn't until after the Air Force became a distinct service that the final blow to institutional segregation was delivered. In 1948, President Truman signed Executive Order 9981, abolishing racial discrimination in the armed forces entirely.
But, an executive order is just ink on paper.
Right.
The operational reality came in 1949 with Air Force Letter 35.3, which mandated that black airmen be reassigned to formerly all-white units based strictly on their qualifications.
It's the difference between the owner of a restaurant rewriting the recipe book versus actually getting into the kitchen and forcing the line cooks to use those new ingredients together under the extreme stress of a dinner rush.
That's a perfect analogy. And consider this in the context of the ADTC Level C requirements for a modern technical sergeant. To lead effectively, you have to understand that systemic change requires both top-down policy and bottom-up execution.
It has to happen on the ground.
It requires individuals of different backgrounds living, sweating, and sacrificing side by side. Letter 35.3 forced the application of the respect virtue at a systemic level.
We also see the breaking of rigid educational barriers. Before WWII, if you wanted to fly, you generally needed 2 years of college and you had to be 21. But the war machine was desperate for pilots. So in 1941, Congress passed Public Law 99, creating an enlisted pilot training program. High school graduates between 18 and 25 could apply.
These were the famous flying sergeants of Class 42C. They graduated in March 1942 and were thrown straight into the fire, flying the P-38 Lightning.
And the P-38 was no joke. A massive twin-engine, twin-boom fighter. It was complex, heavily armed, and incredibly fast. The military had to admit that raw talent and cognitive capability weren't strictly gated behind a college degree.
But perhaps one of the most poignant examples of air power in World War II detailed in the manual isn't about destruction at all.
Oh, Operation Chowhound.
Yes.
May 1945. The German-occupied Netherlands were in the grip of a brutal famine. Millions were starving. The U.S. Army Air Forces flew 2,268 sorties with B-17 Flying Fortress bombers.
The B-17 was designed to turn cities to rubble, but for Operation Chowhound, the mechanics of the mission were entirely inverted.
They flew at terrifyingly low altitude, sometimes just 400 feet off the ground, completely vulnerable to German anti-aircraft fire. And Germany had not officially surrendered yet.
Which is terrifying.
And instead of opening the bomb bay doors to drop high explosives, they dropped 4,000 tons of food rations to 3 million starving Dutch citizens.
Analytically, Operation Chowhound perfectly illustrates the mandate that airmen are guardians of freedom and justice. It demonstrates that the justified application of military logistics includes the power to preserve life on a massive scale.
The ultimate humanitarian mission.
It is the service before self ethos projected across a geopolitical map.
But the moment you conquer the air, you hit a new ceiling. You realize the atmosphere itself is a boundary. And that forces the ultimate question of excellence in all we do. How do you project these same values into a vacuum? This brings us to the edge of space.
The origins of the space program are a fascinating collision of theoretical American innovation and captured wartime technology. You have the seminal early experiments of American engineer Robert H. Goddard with liquid-fueled rockets. But at the end of World War II, the landscape shifts dramatically when the U.S. captures Nazi Germany's V-2 rocket technology.
And the personnel behind it. Roughly 1,600 leading scientists and engineers, including Wernher von Braun, were brought to the U.S. under Operation Paperclip. The V-2 was a terror weapon, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. It arsed into the stratosphere and came down at supersonic speeds. You couldn't even hear it coming.
Air Force leaders immediately grasped the implications. The domain of conflict was expanding vertically. In 1946, Major General Curtis E. LeMay, who was then the Deputy Chief of the Air Staff for Research and Development, envisioned space operations simply as an extension of air operations.
He commissioned a study, and his foresight is staggering. He wrote, "We can see no more clearly all the utility and implications of the spaceships than the Wright brothers could see fleets of B-29s bombing Japan."
He understood the trajectory of technology perfectly. But to master that new domain, they had to understand not just the propulsion mechanics, but the human payload.
Right.
How does the human body react to an environment it was never biologically evolved to survive in?
Which brings us to the medical pioneers. Dr. Harry Armstrong creating the Department of Space Medicine, and the incredible story of the Haber brothers in 1955. They needed to study the effects of weightlessness, but they obviously didn't have spacecraft yet. So they used F-100 Super Sabre jets at Randolph Air Force Base to execute massive parabolic maneuvers.
The mechanics of a parabolic flight are fascinating. The pilot pulls the jet up into a steep climb, accelerating. Then at the apex of the climb, they push the nose over into a dive.
Like a roller coaster.
Exactly.
Right.
For a brief window at the top of that arc, maybe 15 to 30 seconds, the centrifugal force of the arc perfectly cancels out the pull of gravity.
So the people inside experienced total microgravity. They were quite literally inventing space medicine by throwing fighter jets across the sky, which loops us perfectly back to our opening hook. Because while they were testing pilots, they were also testing animals. The manual includes this highly specific detail about Brooks Air Force Base in 1959.
They needed to launch monkeys to test life support systems. But they needed a pressurized suit that was incredibly durable and heat-resistant to protect the animal inside the capsule.
And a scientist literally looked at an ironing board cover, realized the material properties were exactly what they needed, and fabricated a spacesuit out of it.
It's brilliant.
It's hilarious, but it's also the ultimate manifestation of operational pragmatism. They didn't have a multi-million-dollar supply chain for monkey spacesuits yet. They needed a solution, and they found one.
Resourcefulness at its peak. And this relentless early experimentation laid the groundwork for massive strategic shifts. By the early 1990s, during the Gulf War, space operations transitioned from the black world of absolute, highly classified secrecy and directly into mainstream tactical military operations.
The manual refers to the Gulf War as the first space war. It gave coalition forces the ultimate high ground to drive Iraqi forces out of Kuwait. Suddenly, warfighters in sandy foxholes, pilots in cargo planes, and sailors on ships all had access to space-based information.
We are talking about the Global Positioning System, or GPS. Think about the mechanics of GPS. You have a constellation of satellites broadcasting highly precise time signals from atomic clocks down to the Earth. A receiver on the ground picks up signals from at least 4 satellites, calculates the minute differences in the time it took those signals to arrive, and triangulates its exact position on the globe.
It fundamentally altered navigation, targeting, and coordination. It's like upgrading from a physical map and a compass directly to a real-time global digital coordinate system in a single bound. From the Wright brothers hovering over the sand in 1903 to satellites orchestrating global troop movements from orbit in 1991.
And today, the Space Force represents the ultimate planetary-scale execution of the network test and the USA test we discussed earlier.
I mean,
While the orbital domain is increasingly saturated and contested, protecting space isn't an abstract scientific endeavor. It is actively protecting the infrastructure that runs global communications, banking, and missile warning systems. It is protecting the everyday life of the nation from threats that are entirely invisible to the naked eye.
But all of this doctrine, all of this history, the dizzying evolution of the technology, it all culminates in the actual human beings tasked with executing the mission. The machines don't make ethical choices. We conclude today's deep dive by looking at how the service before self ethos is paid for in blood in the modern era.
We established that the independent USAF was born on 18 September 1947. And from that moment on, the manual tracks a continuous, visceral thread of unimaginable human sacrifice.
Let's talk about the reality of Vietnam. The manual highlights William Pitsenbarger, a pararescueman. The environment in Vietnam was brutal, dense jungle canopies that helicopters couldn't land in. So during a massive firefight, Pitsenbarger was lowered down from a hovering helicopter through the trees on a winch.
He voluntarily dropped into a trapped Army infantry unit that was taking heavy casualties.
He treated the wounded, organized defensive perimeters, and helped hoist the injured up to the helicopters. But the ground fire became so intense the helicopters had to pull back. Pitsenbarger refused to leave the men on the ground. He stayed. He treated the wounded and fought until he was killed. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor.
Then there is Dwayne Hackney, another pararescueman. His rescue helicopter was searching for a downed pilot when it took a direct hit from a 37mm anti-aircraft shell. The aircraft instantly burst into flames.
And in the absolute chaos of a burning helicopter spinning out of control, Hackney found the rescued pilot, strapped his own parachute onto the pilot's back, and pushed him out the door to safety.
Giving away your only parachute in a burning aircraft falling from the sky.
It's unbelievable.
Hackney only survived because, incredibly, before the helicopter exploded, he found an unbuckled, oil-soaked spare parachute in the wreckage. He managed to slip it on just as a second shell blew him completely out the open door. He pulled the ripcord, the canopy opened, and he landed in enemy territory before being rescued again. He became one of the most decorated enlisted airmen in history.
That is the literal physical embodiment of the creed. I will never leave an airman behind.
As we move into the post-Cold War era, the geopolitical landscape fractures. We see treaties like the 1987 INF Treaty between the U.S. and USSR aiming to eliminate intermediate-range missiles, a treaty that was eventually suspended in 2019.
And with the fall of the Soviet Union, the nature of the threat shifted drastically to asymmetric, decentralized warfare. The manual points to the 1996 Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia. A massive truck bomb detonated outside the housing complex.
It marked the first time the USAF was directly, massively targeted by terrorists. 19 airmen were killed. And in Somalia, in 1993, the infamous Black Hawk Down incident. Technical Sergeant Timothy A. Wilkinson earned the Air Force Cross. The manual describes how he repeatedly sprinted across a lethal, fire-swept four-way intersection under intense enemy small arms and RPG fire to reach and treat casualties from a downed UH-60 helicopter.
He provided life-saving medical care for 18 hours during an unrelenting urban firefight.
But the text really drives home the profound cost of the new millennium, specifically the post-9/11 operations in the rugged terrain of Afghanistan and the urban centers of Iraq.
These stories are staggering. In 2002, during the Battle of Takur Ghar, Jason D. Cunningham, a medic, braved heavy machine gun fire 7 different times to move wounded patients to a safer location on a freezing, exposed mountainside. He saved 10 lives, but he was fatally wounded in the process.
That same year, combat controller John A. Chapman found himself in a similar nightmare. His team was ambushed. Chapman charged straight into thigh-deep snow, moving uphill against fortified enemy machine gun positions.
Into the snow?
Yes. He single-handedly assaulted a bunker to draw fire away from his teammates, saving his entire rescue team at the cost of his life. He was the first USAF member to receive the Medal of Honor since the Vietnam War.
Consider the physiology of what Robert Gutierrez endured in 2009. He is a combat controller pinned down in a building in Afghanistan. He is shot through the chest. His lung collapses. He is suffering from a tension pneumothorax, where air fills the chest cavity and physically crushes the heart and the remaining lung.
You are drowning in your own chest cavity.
Exactly. So a medic performs a needle decompression on him in the middle of a firefight, jamming a massive needle into his chest to vent the trapped air, just so he can take a breath.
And despite that unimaginable physiological trauma, Gutierrez doesn't evacuate. He stays on the radio. He calculates the coordinates and calls in 3 danger-close A-10 strafing runs.
Wait, let's clarify danger close for the listener. That doesn't just mean the planes are bombing nearby. It means you are calling down high-explosive ordnance so incredibly close to your own position that the lethal shrapnel radius actually overlaps with where you were lying.
Right, it's a last resort.
He called in 30-millimeter depleted uranium rounds just 30 feet away from his team to break the ambush. He survived and saved his 10-man team.
Then you have DeLorean Sheridan in 2013 dealing with an insider attack and allied Afghan police officers suddenly opening fire on U.S. forces with a machine gun at point-blank range. Sheridan exposed himself to heavy fire to neutralize the shooter, physically dragged his wounded teammates to safety, and then orchestrated the chaotic arrival of 6 medevac helicopters, saving 23 lives.
And in Iraq, Airman First Class Elizabeth Jacobson. In 2005, her convoy was providing security when her vehicle was hit by a massive improvised explosive device. She was the first security forces airman and the first female airman to die in Operation Iraqi Freedom.
These are not just historical footnotes or dramatic movie scripts. If we pull the lens all the way back and tie this visceral, staggering reality directly back to the ADTC matrix we started with, this is what Level C applying looks like in the profession of arms.
It's the application of the service before self virtue.
Yes, it is the literal manifestation of the airman's creed. I will never leave an airman behind, I will never falter, and I will not fail.
It synthesizes the entire mission of the manual. These names, these stories, they are the active standard by which every current technical surgeon is measured. The Air Force isn't just teaching them to manage schedules, approve leave, or fix turbine engines. They are orienting them to a legacy where doing the right thing might require absolutely everything they have.
It is the ultimate weight of leadership. You cannot ask someone to carry that burden without first ensuring their ethical framework is unbreakable.
For you listening, you may never find yourself dodging rocket-propelled grenades in a freezing mountain pass or trying to stitch a balloon fabric together to invent an air force. But the core tenets we unpack today, integrity, service, excellence, and those rigorous ethical frameworks like the network tests and the divine test, those are universally applicable tools.
Oh, absolutely.
They are tools for leading a team through a brutal corporate restructuring, managing a public relations crisis, or navigating a murky moral gray area in your own family life.
I'd like to leave you with a final thought to mull over. The military grades its mid-level managers, not just on their technical proficiency, but on their moral courage. Ask yourself, if your workplace, your community, or your family generated an airman development and testing chart for your life, what level of comprehension would you be operating at when it comes to your own core values? Are you just at level A, remembering them when it's convenient? Or are you at level C, applying them precisely when it hurts the most?
That is the real test, isn't it? Are we just admiring the theory of the martial art, or are we willing to step onto the mat and throw the punch? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.